Hi, I'm DV, and this time I'm going to talk about how to put together a basic setup for a ball python enclosure. Now, these guys are by far the most common and popular reptiles in the pet trade, but one thing is they're always advertised as beginner animals. And while it's true you can have a ball python as your first snake or your first reptile and run into no problems, it can be done. They are a little more sensitive to their husbandry needs than a lot of the other more common beginner snakes like milks, corns, rats, kings. These guys need a very specific temperature and humidity gradient, or they are just not going to thrive. So I'm going to cover that and how to get those environmental conditions on point so that your ball python is happy and healthy for you. So what I'm going to start out with is enclosure size. So you can see her enclosure behind me. It's a typical, I think it's 110 quart sweater tub with latches on the sides and air holes drilled into the top. And that's a pretty good size for an adult ball python. That's going to keep them nice and happy. However, for a baby, you're going to want a much smaller enclosure. You can't really let these guys grow into their enclosures because they feel really insecure if they have too much open space. So here, hang out on the floor for a second, Moose. This is what I would use for a baby ball python. You can see it here. Now my rose hair tarantula is currently living in there, but when Moose was a baby, that's what she was in. And the reason for that is that these guys in the wild, they live inside termite mounds in Africa, and that's a very enclosed, tight space. And if they can see too much around them, too much open space, they don't feel secure, they're not going to eat well for you, and you're just going to have a hard time getting them to really thrive in your care. So you're probably going to have to go through several different enclosures for your ball python over their lifespan. But the good news is the tubs like I use, they're pretty darn cheap, way cheaper than a tank. And I do prefer tubs simply because the plastic does a much better job of holding in humidity than a tank. If you do use a tank, you're probably going to have to use cling wrap or, a damp towel or something over a portion of the lid to keep the humidity where it needs to be, because those things dry out like crazy. So kind of in the vein of keeping things at the correct humidity, substrate is important. Now what I use is this. This is cypress mulch. Looks like this in the bag, and if you take it out, looks like this. And the reason I prefer that is that it does hold the humidity pretty well without being too messy. Now, there are plenty of substrates out there that work for ball pythons. A lot of people use EcoWorth, and that's absolutely fine. It keeps the humidity where it needs to be. I just personally don't like it because it gets really messy, so I only use it for my animals that really need to burrow to be happy. Some other options are orchid bark. I even know people that use newspaper, and as long as you can keep the humidity where it needs to be with the newspaper, that's absolutely fine too. So, one thing I do need to say, you can't use any sort of cedar bedding. That's incredibly toxic. And the jury's still out on treated pine bedding. Some people use it with no problems. Some people swear it causes respiratory issues. I stay away from it just because the cypress mulch is super easy for me to get, and it works well for me. So if you plan on using pine, do a ton of research on it. Make sure you know both sides of that argument and make your own decision based on that. So another thing that isn't really substrate but kind of falls in that same category of keeping humidity and environmental conditions where they need to be is this stuff. Now this is sphagnum moss. And it's really useful for providing things like humid hides. So what a humid hide is basically you take the ball python's hide, you grab a handful of wet sphagnum moss, put it inside the hide, and that gives them an area of really high humidity that they can go in if they need that. This is especially useful around a shed or something, so they can go in there and get that shed off no problem. I do that whenever she looks like she's about to go into shed. And so far it's worked beautifully. So as far as keeping humidity in the right range, you'll want humidity to be around 60% for these guys. You can bump it up to 70 around a shed. And to do that, you really don't need anything more complicated than one of these. This is a typical spray bottle. Being a few percentages off on humidity isn't gonna really affect these guys. You just don't want it, you don't want your ball python at 40% humidity or 80% humidity. You just have to keep it in that kind of 50 to 70 range, and they'll be fine. So that's humidity. Another thing you need inside the cage is going to be this. This is a water dish. And be prepared for it to get flipped over and used as a hide regularly. So you will have to keep on top of changing out soaked bedding. She loves to get under that and basically just wear it like a hat because, as you can tell, she's a little bit big to be hiding under that water dish, but she still gives it her best try. Another thing you need to have inside the cage is a hide. Now this is maybe a little bit on the big side, but she feels secure in it. This is actually, I think, a guinea pig hide, but it's solid. She can't see out, and when she curls, all the sides of her body touch the perimeter of the hide all the way around. So it is enough for her to feel secure. And that's important. You don't want a hide that's too big for your snake to curl up in and be touching them on all sides. They need that. And you do want two of those hides in the enclosure. You'll want one over your heat source or under it if you're using heat lamps, and you'll want one on the cool side. And typically these hides should be identical. And the reason for that is that if they have a hide they particularly like and one they don't really like that much, they'll choose the hide they like sometimes over going where they need to be for their temperature needs. So you don't want that to happen. So two identical hides, one on the hot side, one on the cool side. So as far as hot and cool sides go, ball pythons need a hot spot of around 90 degrees. Some people go a couple degrees higher or a couple degrees lower. Do some research and figure out exactly where you think you want to set your hot spot. Definitely nothing over, I'd say, 90, 93 degrees. I set mine at 90, and it stays within 1 degree of that at all times. So that's my personal preference for the hot spot. The ambient temperature, which is what the temperature on the cool side should be, should not go below 80. And here in my reptile room, 80, sometimes 78 is pretty much the lowest it ever gets. So she's set up for both hot and cool temperatures. As far as setting up the hot spot goes, what you'll need two things. You'll need a heat mat. This is a UTH, under tank heater. This is just the Reptitherm brand that you can find everywhere. And you'll need one of these. Now this is a thermostat, and I cannot stress enough the importance of the thermostat. Because those heat pads, they're designed to cater to a whole range of reptiles. Everything from, a snake that might need an 80-degree hot spot to a bearded dragon that needs a 120-degree basking area. So if you leave it unregulated by a thermostat, these things will shoot up to 114, 120 degrees easy, and it does not take long, like half an hour, and they can get that hot. And that's hot enough to cause some serious burns for these guys. What's more, when those heat pads fail, they fail on, and what that means is that they keep getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And not only is that, not really safe for you, because you don't want something getting that hot in your house without you knowing about it, but it's really unsafe for these guys because, if they're sitting on it, they'll get burned. And I've seen some truly horrific burns that come from under tank heaters that are left unregulated. Now, this thermostat prevents all that. So you can see it has some dials to set the temperature you want it to go to. And it has this attachment. Now, this is the probe. What you do is, here, sit on the floor for a second again, Moose. Oh, you're going straight into your hide. That's great. This probe goes between the heat mat and the tank. So if the tank is right here, I'm going to put the probe right here and then put this on the tank. Of course, I'll unwrap it first. But that's how that works. And then you also have this little plug here that the heat mat plugs into on the thermostat. So it's pretty simple, and it will save your snake's life, or at the very least save you a hefty vet bill. So, come on, get back out of there. We're not done yet, Moose. So I think that's about it for temperature and humidity. As far as gauging your temperatures, I really recommend a temp gun or a laser thermometer, which you can get at most pet stores. You just press a button, aim it at what you want to find out the temperature of, and it'll tell you to, a 1/10 of a degree what the temperature is. So those are invaluable. As far as hygrometers go, again, you'll want a digital one, because those little analog ones where they look like a clock face and they have arrows on them, those are useless. Those, they can be 10-15% off on a good day. And the thermometers are even worse. So don't get those. Go digital. They last forever, and it's worth the money. And your snake will definitely think it's worth the money. So I guess that's about it for the setup. If you are getting a ball python, or you're thinking about getting a ball python, they are incredibly docile. As you can see, though some of them do have a temperament to them. Babies especially will tend to be a little more nippy, so don't let that put you off. They almost always are going to grow out of that. If you do get one, though, I gotta recommend, get one from a breeder. Find someone online that they have a good reputation within the reptile community. And first of all, you'll get a lot more options for paint jobs than you will going to a pet store. Second of all, you're going to get a healthy snake. And that's really important, because usually when they come from a pet store, they are not healthy. They've not been living in the correct conditions, and no one at a pet store really knows what they're doing with the exotic animals, in my experience. Moose here, she's a normal. She was actually adopted from a pet store. She was put up for adoption because she was too aggressive, and it turned out she had a retained shed. Got that off, she was fine. Stopped biting, started taking food, everything went well. And that was 2 years ago, maybe. So that's my tips on how to do a basic ball python setup. And give you a close-up of Moose here. See how pretty she is. She doesn't really care. She just kind of wants to go hide again, so I'm going to get her back in her enclosure and let her do that. Like and subscribe, leave a comment below for more exotic pet videos. I'm definitely going to be doing a series on ball pythons, because there's just so much about them that people need to know, and that I think is just really fascinating. All right, see you later.